Hey guys, Happy New Year. So today I wanted to talk about spiritual bypassing because I feel like I've gotten a few experiential insights into what this is and what this feels like that I wanted to share with you. And before we start, I want to just address the fact that as a group, spiritual people are a really fun group to totally make fun of, even when you include yourself in that group. And so there's a lot of blame and shame and jokes around the issue of spiritual bypassing. But we need to let go of those if we're really going to go deeper with this. And really, the kind of subject that this leads into, of course, ends up with the same place: awareness, love, and of course, trying to get rid of the suffering in our life. So, what spiritual bypassing is the same old thought patterns we're carrying over from perhaps before we got into spirituality to use thought to avoid feeling and to avoid awareness. And really, when we're not spiritual bypassing, there's this love and awareness that it's a way that we're spiritual bypassing is a way we're using thought to hold ourselves apart from and to repress it. So there are beautiful things waiting for you, and it's nothing to shame yourself for whatsoever. We all do this as we get into spirituality. We learn things the hard ways, and sometimes it's when you hit rock bottom, when you really experience um, how this actually applies. So, like I say, it's holding ourselves apart from some joy and some love. And I have this strong example I wanted to share. So, when I was a teenager, there was somebody I knew who absolutely would not listen to any sort of rock music and would only listen to music that had no beat. They were a conservative Christian and they thought that most of the genres of music were evil. And I was talking to someone who knew him, this person who believed this way, really well. And it surprised me when he said that it's not that he doesn't enjoy music or doesn't enjoy any of that music. He, in fact, really enjoys it. And that's why it's so hard for him to maintain this and to believe that it's evil. It's a painful experience for him. And so this is kind of a strong example to use, but it's the same exact pattern of what we're doing. So when we're using thought, we're using basically a type of morality. We're using some sort of teachings that we've learned that may be true teachings and pointers that came out of of clarity and love, but our mind is using them in a way to avoid feeling. So another example within the past year of how I did this is at the start of the pandemic, there was some stress in my house about grocery shopping, and my husband drank the last of the orange juice that I was saving for my kids, and I got really triggered by it. And so instead of reacting to it, I knew I should go into the feeling of it and feel how I felt in my body. And as I did that, immediately this thought came up. It's nothing. And I realized that the thought was trying to avoid the feeling that this thought came up. And of course, it's nothing is a really powerful pointer if understood in the correct way. But what it was a thought that said it was nothing that was actually avoiding the feeling. And of course, nothing does not, there can be nothing said about the true unique sensation of feeling any time that we're feeling. But nothing doesn't describe it. Nothing's glossing over it. Nothing in that occasion was me trying to avoid feeling. And so in every circumstance we have to know for ourselves whether we're doing this. And it's very abstract kind of thinking to try to see it in other people. We can feel the resonance with their words, but for ourselves it's an experiential thing. So another big insight that I had recently, the one I shared in my last video, was Rupert Spira just absolutely clearly, better than has ever been explained to me, saying that we cannot actually remember love or happiness, but we misconstrue the things that happen right along the same time that those things arose. So in spirituality, there's a deep love that arises for certain practices that allow you to have breakthroughs, or maybe the teachers or the places or anything. There's this deep love and devotion that arises, which can be a beautiful expression in itself, or it can mean that we make this technique the end all be all. So I sort of finally understood how I had done this. I had done this with various things. With my awakening experience, there were like certain books, events, people who were right, who seemed to be completely key to it, who were there right at the time. And it was very difficult to not, in my head, make those things that I equated with happiness. And when those things would disappoint me, or when I felt apart from those things, there was a lot of suffering that arose. Another example of how I did this was before I had the relatively big breakthrough. I had these breakthroughs going on really long runs. And just this sort of peace and love and just this deep, like, quiet mind arose that I had not experienced before in any other way. So of course, the running put me in a meditative state, and I equated the running with that feeling, not realizing that that was my deepest being at its core, and that it really had nothing to do with the running. And so life kind of came around to showing me that this was a problem, that I was equating it with the running, and there was a lot of suffering coming up and a lot of things I would ignore to go on these super long runs when I had little kids to take care of and needed my energy for some other things. And eventually I started having this back and stomach pain come up from the impact. And so over this past year, just this past year, I learned how to shorten my runs and run on trails and turn running into something that was really positive and good for my body. And learned that there are all kinds of other techniques and ways I can do this, but essentially, if I'm putting the technique there and you know, sort of idolizing it and thinking that it's everything, then that a lot of suffering will arise out of that, because I've thought that the object was the happiness itself. I've forgotten myself again. And so there's a lot of spiritual teachings, there's the law of attraction that says you only focus on positive aspects. And so this bothered me for a very long time, because I intuited that there would be a lot of spiritual bypassing or avoidance going on. And I think that there's a point on our journey where the clouds sort of part and we realize that there's no exclusion. So if we're only focusing on the positive, we're actually giving the negative a lot of being and a lot of reality. We're making the negative real in our experience by focusing on the positive, and then there's this like inner resistance. But this can only happen in thought, because thought is the thing that separates, that creates the negative space that has the positive or the negative. When there's a deeper truth to reality, that when we align the qualities of awareness, when we align with the qualities of what we truly are, this unconditional love, that every dark thought has like a light side. And there's a video I want to make, if I can like write it out and get it together, but it's I've realized over the past year that every like incredibly painful thought I've had has had a desire in it that I've wanted to see through. And it's like a beautiful, clearly loving self-love desire underneath it. And that's another way we bypass, is by avoiding desire. And when we refuse to look at something that we really do not want, again, we're splitting ourselves. We're creating the positive and negative. But if we can look at something that we really do not want with openness, then we can finally, and this is something I experienced in a big way recently, we can finally identify the things that we do want out of it. And we've come here to live this contrast to, as Abraham Hicks says, to like sift and sort through experiences, to live these unique lives relatively in order to identify where we want to be going. And so allowing desire is, and really understanding that desire is suffering. The Buddhists are right. Desire is suffering when we are holding ourselves apart from the desire, when we are doubting the desire. There's, in feeling is not behind the thought of the desire. But a pure desire is this alignment with feeling, and it feels exactly as if you already have it. And that's how you can identify a pure desire. So those are some ways that we can spiritually bypass. And again, like I say, the term is kind of like caught on and it's gotten a lot of weight to it. But really, again, it's just, it's knowing the difference between thought and feeling. And when we have this sort of thought of ourselves as a spiritual person, we try to hold ourselves to the standard. And we should know that if we want to improve, like this desire that's behind it, this desire to truly improve and become a loving being, that if we do believe that what we are can change, then we realize that our idea of what we are is just a placeholder for something. And of course, if it's a placeholder, it's already empty. And so the way that you can avoid spiritually bypassing is to realize that that placeholder is already empty. However, if you turn into a belief the thought, there's no I, this is the insight leading into the insight I had last night. So sometimes when I'm asleep, things just sort of like kind of get reconceptualized. It's kind of a weird thing. But lately I've been waking up in the night and been like, oh my God, there's no me. And of course, this was a reflection of a thought of this sort of like new belief I was forming, that there was no me, and this is this realization that I'm somehow gonna have to live with or something. And so last night, for some reason, this was reframed, and I sort of understood that it was completely avoiding, that the idea that there was no me was perpetuating a me, and that there really is only this getting out of the way and allowing this complete love and awareness.